All right, big question I get in the Leading Saints email is, Kurt, listen, great content, but how do you motivate people? How do I get people to do something that I need them to do, right? This is a pressure and a tension that we often feel as church leaders. And the other side of that coin is accountability, right? How do you hold somebody accountable, especially in a church context? Maybe in the, secular world, you have bonuses or I can fire you but what about in the church context? And luckily, we have the expert in the Latter-day Saint community. His name is Michael Timms, and he's written books, done TED Talks. He goes around and consults with companies all about this concept of accountability. So I was more than excited to invite him into Zion Lab, where we did a live stream in front of a live remote audience. We talked all things accountability and holding people accountable, and how do you do it in a church context, and what are the principles there, and what are good ways to do it, what are bad ways to do it. You're going to love it. Here's my interview with Michael Timms. Michael, maybe just give us a little background of who you are, where you live, and when people ask what you do for a living, what do you tell them?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Michael Timms. I live in Vernon, British Columbia, Canada. For those of you who know that the world does not end above Washington State, so that's where I am is above Washington State, probably closer to above Spokane, I think.
Nice.
A couple hour drive above north of Spokane. So when people ask me what I do, I say that I teach executive teams how to create high performance teams. Mm-hmm. And step one is really about improving their leadership.
Yeah. And you have a book that's called How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability, 3 Habits That Make or Break Leaders and Elevate Organizational Performance. And this, accountability it can turn into a buzzword a little bit, maybe in the more professional world, but it has an interesting relationship with a faith experience, especially our faith experience. We believe in accountability. We believe in a judgment day. We believe in owning up to covenants that we've made and so forth. Do you see any differently in the faith context?
I think that my background in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has really helped me understand accountability in a way that is not really. I think it's given me an advantage to being a thought leader around accountability, and I think it was one of the young women's values is a faith in accountability or no choice in accountability. Right. And I think that's a lot of times the people don't understand that there's 2 sides to that coin, and that we have to be accountable for our actions. And anyways, I think that's helped me. But yeah, in a faith context, it was kind of interesting. I have a TED Talk that was published about a year and a half ago that became quite popular, called How to Claim Your Leadership Power. And shortly after that was published, I was sitting on the stand with the stake president, and he leaned over and he's like, so Michael, so how can I hold people accountable in the church, right, to completing their assignments? And I said, well, the problem is with a group of volunteers, like, you can't enforce any consequences, so you really can't hold people accountable. And sort of before I finished, he kind of threw up his hands kind of jokingly. He's like, all right, well, Michael Timms says that you can't hold people in the church accountable, so I guess there's no hope. Yeah. I think that what we're going to be exploring today is we'll be talking about not how to hold people accountable, but there are a number of things that you can do to support people to be accountable and support people to get the right results without going to consequences, because really there are no consequences. In fact, the only consequence that you could enforce is to be released, which I think most people would be like, sweet, like if that's all I got to do to get released, right?
Yeah. And so where's a good launching off point to understanding this? Because it does seem like I need a lever to hold someone accountable, right? A consequence that
Yeah.
and that I can sort of dangle over their head like, "Hey," or even a guilt
Mhm.
trip, right? Like, I don't know, have you considered the eternities of your soul? And if you don't, fulfill this, ministering assignment,
Right.
I'm just saying, maybe it won't end well for you, but
Right.
where's a good launching off point for that?
Well, I think your initial question around, what is accountability, and how does that how does it work in a faith context? I think we have to first understand what accountability is, and the way that I define accountability is, um, accountability is taking ownership of results and focusing on what you can do to achieve the right results. Um, and so there's kind of two parts there. One um, is owning results, and the other part is focusing on what you can do to achieve the right results. And I think that so that's the way I define accountability. I think the
Mhm.
problem is that I think a lot of society has really sort of misused that word and created something out of that word that it is not. I think
Accountability
society
or results?
accountability.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people use the term accountability as like, okay, we got to hold this person accountable, or you'll read in the news paper, or nobody reads the newspaper. You'll see in the news, that CEO must be held accountable. When really what they're talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
is that that CEO is to blame and they need to be punished. And so I think society um, has misused that word accountability and used it as a euphemism for blame and punishment, which is typically
Mhm.
what they're really talking about. But that's not what accountability is about. It's about owning results. It's about something that you do, right? It's me. I'm going to take ownership of results. And in fact, blaming other people for problems is the exact opposite of accountability, right? So when we're trying to, trying to hold people accountable when things aren't going well, typically that's us not owning our part of the problem, right? So I think the key thing is to understand that accountability, yeah. So consequences are a small part of accountability, but really it's about how can we support other people to uh, own their results, good or bad.
Mhm.
We all need help to remain accountable. I need help. I think most people need help, and so I think as our job as leaders in the church are to support people to want to get the right results. And I think most people want to feel like that they're, first of all, in a work context, that they're coming to work. I think most people want to feel successful in a work context.
Right.
I think the same is true in a church context. I think most people want to feel that they are fulfilling their responsibilities at church, and people will feel bad if they're not. And so our job is to support people and help them to be accountable.
Yeah. And I guess the other, in your definition, that other word of results kind of jumps out at me in a faith context where I'm like, like, are we going to church to produce results? Like, obviously, in a boardroom, that makes sense. Or, when you're watching the bottom line of your balance sheet or whatever. But in the context of church, that's where it's like where a leader can feel more pressure of getting results because it's sort of attached to his ego, right? He was asked to serve in this role. And if those numbers, the key indicators don't tick up, or that may be a problem. And so, is there more to consider just around that concept of results when we think about accountability?
Yeah, for sure. And I think people have, when they think about results, they think of some sort of numeric, quantifiable thing. And I think ideally you can quantify results, but a lot of times you can't. And I think in a faith context, uh, the results ideally, the key result that we're after is bringing people closer to Christ, right? That is the number one key result that we're after. Now that's kind of hard to quantify, and so we'll want to think about that in a youth context, right? If I'm a youth leader, um, are are they building their testimonies? Are we preparing? So another key result is: are we preparing our youth for missions? Are we preparing them with life skills? Are we preparing them with vocational skills? Are we preparing them to lead in the church? And so, I think, um, And some of the results are, how do I feel about coming to church, right? Do I feel
Mhm.
like coming to church is bringing me closer to Christ? To be honest, I think you could actually, and I don't know that a lot of people do this, but heck, you could do this in a survey, right? I think a Relief Society um, class, I think an elders quorum, um, I think you could do a survey and say, what we're going to do, a quarterly survey, and say, how do you feel like, or do you feel like your testimony is being strengthened over the last quarter? Do you think you're coming closer to Christ? And is there, what would you like to do to come closer to Christ, to strengthen your testimony, whatever those key results are? But I guess that's a long way of saying that results are not necessarily those narrowly defined things that are easily quantifiable. There's a lot of things that are not quantifiable, and I think we just need to get some feedback on those things.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you walk into a typical organization who's maybe hired you, like, is there a place to start? Because I mean, accountability, I feel like you have to sort of build up to it. You can't just say we're now an accountable organization and we'll be holding everybody accountable. Or is that like what do you see when you typically walk into an organization?
Well, when I walk into an organization, fortunately, I have the advantage of I don't have, honestly, I don't have any crappy clients. Like the
Yeah.
only people that call me up to help to look for help are people who are already sort of on the leadership journey themselves, and they want to make their organization even better.
Hmm.
And so I have that advantage, but so there are no broken organizations. I typically do not have any clients that are like totally broken, right? They just want to be better.
Yeah.
Where we start is, I think, where you and I started, which is defining accountability. And
Okay.
look, accountability is not a bad word the way that society has been using it. And look, if we want people to be more accountable, we better make sure that they don't fear that word. Um, and uh, and so it's getting on the same page as far as what accountability is, and then really building an organization. And again, what accountability is it pretty much boils down to getting the right results. And if we don't get the right results, it's working towards how do we get the right results next time. That's really what accountability boils down to. And the key factor in any organization, whether it be a for-profit organization, a non-for-profit organization, a faith organization, the key driver of accountability in the organization is the behavior of its leader or leaders, plural. And if they're not owning problems, then nobody else will.
Hmm.
I was in a long time ago. I was in a ward council where we had a pretty intense bishop, and he called, you know, he called out. Actually, it was the young men's president in the ward council for not, doing something, and and the young men's leader, um, he said, you know what, we can do better. We can, there are things for sure that we can do better, and just totally responded in such an accountable way that everybody in that room, first of all, was a little shocked at the way the bishop handled that, and our respect for that individual really shot up. Who totally owned it and said, "Yeah, you know what, we can do better." And I think, what should be happening is the other way around. And in a ward council, if we're not getting the right results, if we're not getting people to the temple, if we're not achieving our baptisms, if whatever, I think the accountability starts with the bishop saying, hey, I need your thoughts on this. I need your perspective. I need your advice. What can I do differently to make it easier for all of us to get the results that we need to get? And so that is the first step when I work with organizations, is ensuring that leaders are taking those first steps and modeling accountability. And that's really what my TED Talk is all about. Is there's kind of three key behaviors to model accountability, and I'm going to
Yeah.
assume that I think members of the church already have, and leaders of the church already have an advantage, and hopefully they already are modeling accountability. Hopefully they are not blaming. Hopefully they are looking in the mirror and owning problems. So the things that I wanted to share with you today are probably some more tactical things that whether it's a bishop, whether it's an elders quorum president, relief society president, anybody in a leadership position can do to support their teams to get the right results.
Yeah. And I appreciate that just, for a leader to take the steps to own or be self-aware enough to say, "What am I missing? Like, how can I help you help the organization as a whole? Is there anything I'm doing that's standing in your way?" And being reflective on that. Is there any other, like, approaches that you'd recommend as far as for a leader to just own up to the problem or to being more accountable?
Um, I think a lot of times, you know, it's kind of interesting. One of the first things we do when we start working with an organization is we do a 360-degree assessment, and so we have a database full of responses to our 360 assessment tool. And doesn't matter what the organization does, you know what field they're in, but almost always, as an organization, their lowest score is around requesting feedback. And I would say the same is true in the church. I think that we just don't ask for feedback enough. And if you do ask people how you can do better, they'll tell you, right?
Mhm.
And if you sincerely ask, what can I do to make it easier for you to get the right results? How can I support you better to achieve the results that we're after? They'll tell you, right? If you give them some time to think about it, and that's why it's so powerful. It's also really powerful because you're also signaling that this is a feedback. This is a culture of feedback that we want. This is a highly accountable culture, and nobody's ego is above getting the results that we as an organization, as a ward council, have said that we want to achieve. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a key behavior that drives accountability in the organization. Is number one, requesting feedback and requesting feedback in the right way.
Yeah. It's really powerful. And you mentioned there, like, coming, no egos, too big for the results that the ward council organization is determined or that they want to go towards. I guess my question is, sometimes I would imagine the ward council or even the bishopric has certain results or goals in mind, and the tough part of holding people accountable is that maybe the rest of the ward never felt like they voted in those results or wanted those results. And so they never bought into them. And so then they're being held accountable for something that they never ultimately agreed to, other than sort of this general cultural norms of, like, these are the things we do. And if if you don't do them, then we're not getting our result type thing. So I'm just curious, like, how important is that result dynamic of, like, agreeing on the result so that you can even, or the expectation, right? So that you can hold people accountable to the expectation.
So
Uh,
that's exactly right. Yeah, and that is the first step in getting the right results, is being clear on what those results are and getting feedback and agreeing on those results together. And so,
Mhm.
so to your audience, Kurt and I did not rehearse this. This is this he just intuitively knows, and I think a lot of people intuitively know that if we want to get the right results, we got to agree on what those are. And I think so. That's my point. That's the first step. So I'd say there's two things. There's two components that you need to agree on right off the bat. Whether you're a bishop or a relief society president, young women's president, when you're meeting either with a ward council or with your presidency, or with your class or quorum, whatever it is, the first things you got to agree on are what's the purpose of our organization?
Yeah.
What are we striving to achieve? What are the key outcomes that we're looking for? And to get their feedback on that, and to agree on that. So that's step one. Step
And
two is
is there,
also,
can I
sorry, go ahead.
maybe insert there, like, I'm just guessing, like, if we had the time and space to ask 100 wards, what's our purpose here as a ward? I think all of us are going to default to bringing people into Christ, right? And it's sort of like, it's almost become this overused platitude that it's like, well, what does that even mean? Like, how do we know when we arrive there, right? So, is there importance of not only agreeing on it, but actually, you know, articulating what it looks like at the end of it, or
Yeah, exactly. And I think obviously we got to dig deeper. And I think maybe that's our overarching goal. Maybe we have a goal statement, and every organization will have the same goal statement, which is bringing people under Christ, right? But each organization is going to have different things, right? The Elders Quorum is going to have maybe different goals than a young women's class, and a young women's organization. And I think the thing is for the young women's leaders, like, hey, what do we want? And maybe a helpful exercise is to say, a year from now, 2 years from now, what do we want the girls to be able to do, and what do we want the girls to be feeling differently than they feel now? And I think that's so. It's what skills can we give the young women? What do we want them to feel, and what do we want them to have? What kind of relationships do we want them to have with their class members? Right. So I think those are the results that we're after. Overarching theme, bring souls to Christ. But under that, each class, each quorum should have different key results. And I wouldn't have a laundry list. I think pretty much you're looking for 3 or 4 key things that you want to be able to achieve in the lives of the people that you have stewardship for.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think, I mean, 3/4 of the battle is even just having that conversation. I think a lot of organizations in the church, they don't even they make a lot of assumptions of like, well, of course we're on the same page. You really haven't taken that time to say, all right, what are we doing here? Like, what is the result we're aiming for? Does it look different in our area? What does the handbook say? How would we adapt that to our ward specifically? Or, is it all about ordinances, or is that maybe a secondary thing? Or I don't know, but just having the conversation, which I think a lot of wards or organizations don't even take that step, right?
No, exactly. And as a matter of fact, I was in a bishopric, and it was a brand new bishopric, and I was a counselor in the bishopric, and we were our first ward council. The bishop he's an awesome guy. He's love the guy. He has a leader. Professionally, he's a leader in a kind of an administrative role. But we sat down, and the first things, like, he just got right down to business. Okay, and let's just talk about. There was even no acknowledgement that, hey, we are a new bishopric. This is and a lot of the ward council members were the same. But there's no acknowledgement of, hey, this is something new. Maybe we should talk about what is our purpose together and how we want to work together. As a matter of fact, that's actually kind of the other thing that I wanted to mention is that as an organization, if you're a leader in the church, the first thing you do need to do, as Kurt pointed out, is talk about what are the key results that we're after, right? Drill down as we talked about. But the next thing you want to talk about is our expectations of one another. And that's my second tip for your listeners is, what are we expecting from each other? Just some research for you. There's some research done around, what's the difference between the best performing teams and the worst performing teams. And the researchers found that pretty much the most important factor was that the best performing teams, the first thing they did is set out general guidelines of how we're going to work together. The worst performing teams got right into just doing the work. And that's a key advantage. And that's something that I'm excited to share with your listeners, is that talk about how you're going to work together. For example, what is our preferred communication medium, right? Are we talking, do we prefer text? Do we prefer, chat or whatever? Do we prefer email? So let's agree on that. Now let's agree on what are some norms around communication. What is an acceptable, when do we agree to respond to, if we said email is our preferred communication method, can we all agree that we will respond to emails within 24 hours? Is that reasonable? Can we agree to that? How often are we going to meet as a group, right? Whether that's a ward council or a quorum presidency or whatever it is. When you complete an assignment, what is my expectation? It was interesting. I actually just had this experience yesterday. I'm a counselor in a elders quorum, and the elders quorum president during our meeting in the morning gave me 3 assignments. And I think I've told them in the past, look, if you give me an assignment, just assume it's done. unless I tell you otherwise. And so he followed up with me by text. He's like, "Hey, Mike, I didn't hear anything from you. Did you do it?" And I was like, "Oh yeah. No, I completed those assignments. Do you want me to report back to you every time I complete an assignment?" And he said, "No, that's fine." But I mean, what I'm saying is maybe that we should talk about that right off the bat. Like how, like what am I going to assume that once I've given you an assignment, it's done? Or would I prefer that, as a leader, would I prefer that my counselors report back to me as soon as they've completed that, right? So like these are the things that we should talk about as a leadership group before we set out doing the work. And I think so there's key results, step one. Step two is expectations. And the advantage of talking about expectations, especially in uh, a faith-based organization or an organization full of volunteers, is that it becomes way easier to address problems when they happen. And trust me, I mean, we all know, we've all had that experience. We will have friction points with the people that we work with in the church. They're not doing what we ask them to do. But if we've already talked about it, if we've already said, "Hey, you know what? We agreed that we would respond to our emails within 24 hours," or we agreed that if you can't do an assignment, that you'd give me a heads up. It's way easier to address that with people. But if you don't set those expectations at the outset, if you try, number one, you're not going to feel as comfortable addressing that with the person. But number two, they're going to feel attacked, right? If
Yeah.
you address it with them, but you hadn't previously agreed to any of these standards, any of these expectations, they're going to feel attacked. And that's why it's critical to make sure that we're on the same page as far as, how are we going to work together? What is my expectation? What do you need from me? And what do I need from you? And can we agree to those things? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And I think that's maybe if a leader or somebody is experiencing, you know, expectations or has a disappointment or something's like, that didn't work out. So maybe going back to, did the structure break down, right? Like, was it the
Yes.
actual task, or maybe, maybe there's an activity that just kind of fell flat, and like, oh, actually we need to build into our system that 3 days out, or the Sunday prior to the activity, we just run through the agenda, the plans and everything with the entire ward council, whatever it is. But I think it's important to not be like, oh, this person just dropped the ball, rather than actually maybe our system is broken, right?
Did you, Kurt, did you watch my TED Talk?
To be honest, I'm sitting here thinking I should have watched your TikTok, but I did not.
Because you're basically repeating exactly
Oh, good.
what one of those habits are on personal accountability.
Oh,
And that's
cool.
actually how I would respond. That's brilliant. Kurt, you're just like, we are on the same
Man.
wavelength, man. We should be partners.
Yeah.
I should
Hey.
have you as part of my team here. But no, that's exactly one of the things that I counsel people when you have a breakdown in accountability. That's the first thing that I would go to, is not because our brains, believe it or not, we are actually, how we all say, "Oh, well, we should give people the benefit of the doubt." I mean, we all know that, right? In
Right.
fact, our brains are programmed the opposite way. We are programmed not to give others the benefit of the doubt. We're programmed to assume that people drop the ball, when in fact, it could very well have been a communication breakdown, or maybe I wasn't clear about my expectations, or maybe I wasn't clear about the timeline, or right, or maybe you did send that to me and it went to my junk mail. All right, so there's a whole bunch of things. And so one of the things that I suggest is the way that we address problems is, hey, where did the process break down there?
Yeah.
And when you address problems in that way, it gets people thinking, yeah, okay, I don't know, where did the process break down? And people are get far less defensive when you're talking about, like, how, where did the ball get dropped here? Not who dropped the ball, but where did the ball get dropped? And maybe I'm one of the, maybe I dropped the ball, right? It is way easier to address, accountability gaps in that way when you're talking about systems.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good. All right. So maybe, how do you phrase each one of these habits? There's 3 habits, right? And maybe just go through how you phrase them.
Yeah, sure. So when we're demonstrating personal accountability, it's really around 3 things. Number one, don't blame, because in fact we are programmed to blame, and blame only. I actually haven't found one positive outcome from blame. It just spawns a whole bunch of negative behaviors in the people that we blame and in ourselves, right? When we're blaming other people, as I mentioned earlier, we are not taking ownership for the problem, right? So number one, don't blame. Number two, look in the mirror and say, hey, ask yourself, how may I have contributed to this problem? I'm not saying fall on your sword, for every problem. Oh, it's totally my fault. It's totally my fault. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, hey, look, was I not clear in my expectations? Was the outcome not clear? Where did the process break down? Right? Is really, let me back up. It's more like what part did I play in that? Is looking in the mirror. And then habit 3 is engineering the solution, which is around taking a look at our processes and saying, are our processes set up to help us get the right results? In a church setting, in a for-profit setting, I strongly believe in standard operating procedures. We should have standard operating procedures, like a standard template for meeting agendas, sacrament agenda. We should have a standard template for baptisms, for funerals, and that should be saved in standard operating procedure folder somewhere. But that would be an example of engineering the solution. So those are the 3 steps around personal accountability. And like I was saying, I assume I'm coming into this assuming that I think a lot of your listeners, and hopefully a lot of your listeners, are already kind of in that mindset. I think it's kind of tough. Like I think most people in a church setting try not to default to blame. Maybe they're thinking it, but they don't typically, because they know that they're dealing with volunteers, right? They're not going to be, you totally dropped the ball, right? Typically, we're not doing that at church. And so I'm assuming that a lot of times church members have applied those 3 habits, and there are some other things that you can do that, such as clarifying results and clarifying expectations of each other, that kind of take it even beyond that.
Yeah. By far, one of the top 3 questions that we receive at Leading Saints when it comes to, leading people, in specific callings or any type of situation is, how do I motivate my people? Right. And I think a lot of people could default to, well, you got to hold them accountable, which we're talking about here. But how would you respond to that? If people, when, especially in a volunteer organization, and they're like, this would work so much better if people weren't involved, because I have to motivate them somehow, right? Whether it's the family history person, the temple person, or the ministering, elders quorum at Relief Society. So how would you respond to that? How can we motivate people?
Guilt.
It does work.
I'm just kidding.
It does work. Shame.
I'm just totally kidding. Yeah, guilt and shame. No, because you what they're, and I think that's, I don't know, maybe that might be some people's go-to. No, the best way to motivate people, there's a number of ways to motivate people in the church. The first thing that you keyed in on is, do they have a say? Do they have a say in what those key outcomes are? And when it comes to expectations about how we're going to work together, like if I am the bishop and I'm saying, hey, I expect you to do this and that, the bishop also needs to say, what do you need from me? What do you need from me in order for you to be successful, right? And to get their feedback on that when you're setting expectations and goals. So I would say number 1 is you want their input on what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and what are how are we going to work together. I'll give you 3 principles. 1 is clarifying that at the outset and giving them choice, right? Choice and accountability.
Yeah.
The next thing is positive feedback. Most of us are terrible at giving positive feedback. And it is incredibly powerful. And what we should be doing is praising people even when they simply do their job, or even get close to achieving the results that we want, or praising people for their effort. But there's really strong research, and I know people, we've heard this for decades and decades. Oh, we should praise people, but we still do not do it well enough. What happens is, when the elders quorum president says to one of his counselors, hey man, I really appreciate you following up and doing your ministering interviews without me asking and just reporting that. I really, really appreciate that.
Hmm.
What's the counselor going to do? The
Like,
counselor,
yeah.
almost for sure, that's going to increase the chances that that counselor is going to do that next month. And that's what the research tells us is that, when you praise somebody, it releases dopamine. Dopamine is addictive. And we want more of it. And we will do the behavior that got us that dopamine hit in the first place. So again, we do not praise enough. And sometimes we reserve praise for heroic things. But my suggestion to your audience is if you want to motivate people to do the right thing, praise them when they do the right thing or even get close to doing that right thing. And just watch. You will see them do it more often. But my third
Love
tip
it.
around how to motivate people is around giving them ownership, not just choice in the key results, but giving them ownership in making decisions. I think a lot of people in leadership positions think that they need to be the one making decisions, and I will say in the church, there are some people with this old mindset that the bishop, the one with the keys, has to make the decision, right? Has to be the one to make the final decision. I would say that that's the case in uh, very few instances where
Mhm.
the one with the keys or the Relief Society president needs to be the one to make the decision. Joseph Smith organized councils right off the get go, right? And the church runs on councils. And if we're getting feedback from the councils, and as a council we can agree on a course of action, and we pray about it and feel good about it, boom, that's our. I remember one time I was a counselor in the bishopric, and a Relief Society president came up to me and she said, "Michael, how do you want the gym set up for this ward activity that was going to be maybe it was a dinner or some sort of ward activity?" And I looked at her and I said, "Sister, this is totally you are the best person to make that decision, right?" And she was kind of like,
Yeah.
"Oh wow," she was an older person, and she's like, "Well, when I ask somebody in the bishopric what to do, they always tell me what to do." And she was like, "Oh," and once I gave her that, you should have seen her eyes light up. She's like, because she knew that she knew what the right thing to do was and the best way to set it up. And so I think if we want to motivate people, uh, and if we want to help them to take accountability, we need to give them ownership. And the way we give them ownership is by asking this question a lot: what do you think we should do? Right? Let them make decisions and resist the urge to jump in and either make decisions for people or solve their problems. Just ask that question: what do you think we should do? Yeah, those are
Yeah.
my 3 tips.
And I love the power of a simple question of, well, what do you think we should do? And then again, it gives them a feeling of ownership, like, oh, I suggested that. And the beauty of it, it's almost like this psychological thing. Like the answer to the next step may be completely obvious, but when you give them the opportunity to formulate it and speak it, that creates a sense of ownership in their own mind. Like, yeah, that was my idea. And now we're seeing it through, and they're actually going to be more they'll follow through more likely because it came from their own brain, right? So,
Bingo, and that's the key. And I think that's really important for your listeners to understand is that this whole time we're talking about how do we hold people accountable, how do we ensure that people do the right thing. Well, we got it to be accountable. We got to give them ownership, right? And
mhm,
giving them ownership is letting them run with it. And the reason why most of us end up in leadership positions in the church, out of the church, is because we're really good at solving problems. People know that they can put us in charge because we'll solve problems. But the problem is that when we get into a leadership position, nobody tells us that our job changes from solving problems to teaching problem solving skills. Um, but in fact, that is our job. As a leader, we are no longer supposed to be solving problems. We are supposed to be empowering other people to solve those problems.
mhm.
And because we are so good at solving problems ourselves, that's what got us, typically called or promoted in the work context. when somebody asks us, what should we do? Hey, Michael, or hey, Kurt, what should we do here? It's so you want to give the answer because you know the answer, but that's not your job. If you're in a leadership position, you need to recognize your job is no longer to give the answers. Your job is to teach other people leadership skills and problem solving skills.
Yeah, it's powerful. Really good stuff. All right, let me just throw a few scenarios at you because I think it's so we want, and you've given some great principles to contemplate and put into practice. I'm just going to give you a few scenarios, and we may repeat a lot of the principles you already said, or double down on them, which is good. It'll help with retention. But a scenario of you just had a word activity and it just fell flat. I mean, there was a bit of chaos. People were showing up late, or people who were participating were showing up late, and it was just a mess. And you, as maybe in the bishopric, there's this feeling of, okay, well, how do I hold that person accountable? Whether it's an activities committee or a specific person, where do we begin in that scenario?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with the expectation of feedback. And again, when we're talking about, and that's something I should have mentioned at the beginning, is when I was talking about agreeing on how we're going to work together, which I call expectations.
Mhm.
One thing that should always be in your expectations with anybody that you work with is feedback. Hey, will you do me a favor? Will you please give me advice and feedback on how well I'm doing here and areas that I can do better? And would you be open to me doing the same for you? Right. So that's something that should be in the expectations. Another thing that I would put in the expectations, give people a heads up about, is what I call lessons learned debriefs. So anytime that we have a ward activity, or a major young women's activity, or a Relief Society activity, we, as a Relief Society presidency or a ward council, whatever, we're going to meet together to debrief how that activity went. And it's going to be a lessons learned exercise. That's an amazing vehicle for giving and receiving feedback, because we start off and we say, even if the ward activity was a disaster, we start off and say, what went well?
Mm.
Okay, let's focus on what went well, and how do we make sure that that continues to happen again, right? How do we make sure that these things that were good continue on? Do we need to come up with kind of some sort of template, some sort of agenda, some sort of right itinerary, to make sure that we continue to do these good things? Okay, so we get that, we record it, and we make sure that we're going to do that next time. All right, what could have been better? What could have been better? Now we'll get a whole bunch of, get some different feedback, this and that. All right. Where did the process break down? So they identify that the food was late, right? That was one of the things. People were waiting forever for the food. Okay, so where did the process break down? Well, and that takes it off of people. Well, that person's an idiot. They were just late. They were lazy. No, where did the process break down? So we can talk about why did the food, arrive late, and if it was likely, it's a combination of, systems problem and maybe human error, right? Or I forgot, or I was late, or whatever. What can we do next time to make sure that the food isn't late? Right? Are the things that we can do, reminders or whatever, can we make sure that we're getting the food, 45 minutes ahead of time or whatever it is, right? But focus on the process and we take it off the person. So that's my suggestion
Yeah.
is, in making sure that things go better next time is implementing those lessons learned debriefs and setting the expectation of feedback.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you bring up another interesting dynamic there of like, it's important, like you said, that, principle one is don't blame. But what happens if you're attempting to hold somebody accountable and they begin to blame, right? Oh, the caterer, like they're a mess. I got there on time. They didn't have the food ready. I had to wait in their lobby for, 60 minutes and that made me late, right? Like they're blaming others. Is there anything that we could do to diffuse that blame, or not let it just be the thing that is now being held accountable is the caterer instead of the individual?
Yeah, and I think, going back to the leader being the one to model the way, I think, where did the process break down? You could also say, hey, is there anything that I could have done differently to make it easier for somebody to get the food here on time? Is
Mm,
there anything that I could have done differently? And you're the one that's modeling the way. You're the one that's modeling accountability. And then
gotcha.
when you have people who are saying, "Wow, is the caterer, or is this, or is that?" It's like, okay, um, is there anything you could do differently next time to ensure that the food gets here on time? Um, Couple things. Number one, we're not saying, and there's a couple of principles in here. One is I'm not blaming you for, as a leader, I'm not blaming you because I know you're not taking ownership of this. I'm not blaming you for the food being late. I'm asking you about next time. And this is something really interesting. When you're talking about the past, any feedback tends to sound like criticism. But
Yeah.
when you're talking about the future, it tends to sound like advice. And advice is way easier to receive than criticism. So that's something to keep in mind as a leader. Talk about the future. Hey, what can we do next time to make sure that this doesn't happen? But another thing you can do is say, when you have gone first, when you have modeled accountability first, and you said, hey, is there anything I could do? I could do differently. You earn the moral authority to say, and what could you do differently?
Mm,
After they've gone through their list of all these things, the people and circumstances that they're blaming, I hear you. And that's unfortunate. Is there anything you could do differently? Well, they can't really get upset at that because you've just gone first, right? You've just
yeah.
modeled the way. And I think
That's
it's, I,
powerful.
I think it's an okay thing. And I think people will receive that okay to say, yeah, I could probably do this differently, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's how you're somebody who's not going to take ownership. I think that's a an easy way to ask them is what could you do differently next time to make sure that we get better results?
Yeah. Is there any advice you have as far as like when that next activity comes around? Because the last thing anybody wants to be is a micromanager where you're thinking, in your brain, you're thinking, I don't know, are they going to show up early to get the food? Because, we talked about that, but do they remember? Maybe I'll call them and text them and, call them again and make sure that, hey, do you remember, like we talked about you picking up the food earlier, whatever it was, right? Is there any advice on not causing the accountability conversation to turn you into a micromanager the next time around?
Yeah, I mean, in an activity setting, I'm a big believer in checklists. If we have had a disaster reward activity, our lessons learned debrief better be coming up with a checklist for next time. What are the things that we need to make sure that we've considered as we plan the next activity and as we carry out the next activity? So that is a standard operating procedure, and I'm a huge believer that doing that will reduce human error. It'll reduce the amount of bad things that will happen. And if you look at any high risk industry, whether that's the medical industry, whether that's the military, you will find a lot of checklists that are used all the time. It's not sitting up on a shelf somewhere. And so that's my first suggestion to make sure that you don't come off as a micromanager is that you have come up with a checklist and that you're talking to the leaders about, hey, are you following the checklist? And are we hitting those milestones? But on your regular responsibilities, like for example, when let's say a counselor is, one counselor in the bishopric is overseeing, they're supporting Sunday school. Okay, so one member of the bishopric counselor, they are supporting Sunday school. They're kind of the key liaison there. As the bishop, what I want to know is, hey, let's say, Kurt, you're the counselor in the bishopric. I'm the bishop. Hey, Kurt, do you have a meeting schedule with the Sunday school president? How often are you meeting with the Sunday school president to make sure that we follow the schedule? Um, it's that regular meeting schedule. It's one of the greatest accountability mechanisms is a regular meeting
Mm,
schedule to make sure that we're on top of things. And I got to tell you, as a bishop or counselor, I've never been a bishop, but I've been a bishop counselor in three different bishoprics. And I got to tell you, anytime that I knew that, if I was overseeing primary or music or ward mission or whatever it was, um, if I was dropping the ball on overseeing that, it was because I was not meeting with them regularly.
Hmm.
And that's a way to keep you as a leader accountable. It's a way to keep them accountable. And actually, I just read just the other day a huge meta-analysis, which it was a study of studies. It's the gold standard of research. It was 138 separate pieces of research, and they found that you have about a 90 to 95% probability of achieving your goals if you have established a regular cadence of check-in meetings.
Mm.
That's an insane statistic.
Yeah, that's
Like,
awesome.
it's like you're pretty much guaranteed to get the right results if you have established a cadence of a meeting schedule. And we all know that, we have that cadence typically as an Elders Quorum president, Relief Society president, and bishopric. But in other responsibilities, as counselors, are your counselors, do they have a regular cadence with the people that they are responsible for overseeing?
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. I love that. All right, next scenario, and those that are listening, feel free to use the question box if you have certain questions that are coming to mind or scenarios that you'd like help on around accountability. But the next scenario I want to present is you're in a presidency, let's say a Relief Society presidency, and the first counselor seems engaged, comes to all the meetings, and you'll maybe give give tasks for that counselor to do, but it seems like the minute she leaves and walks out of the room, she doesn't think about being in, in the Relief Society presidency until the next meeting. And then you show up
Yeah.
and that she's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I was going to do that, but I didn't." How do we hold her accountable?
Yeah, that goes back to expectations. It goes back to, how do I want to, what support do you need for you to get the right results, for you to follow through with your assignments, and what do I need from you? One of the things as a Relief Society president that I would want is, like I said, like I would say, we have to have some sort of a reporting schedule. Do I want you to report back next week? And maybe we did agree to that. Maybe we said, okay, well, just report back at the next Relief Society meeting. Okay. And if the counselor keeps saying, no, I didn't follow through with the responsibilities, I would just sit down and say, individually, one-on-one, not as a Relief Society presidency, but one-on-one with that individual, say, hey, look, is there anything that I can, because I've noticed a pattern here. When I give you responsibility, we follow up a week later, and it isn't being fulfilled. Is there anything that I'm doing or not doing that's making it harder for you to fulfill your responsibilities? Oh, no, 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 you're fine, sister, whatever. No, you're doing fine. All right. What can we do to make it easier for you to follow through on your responsibilities, and for you to achieve those assignments? Because again, I'm sure that counselor is feeling like a failure, right?
Mm.
I know they don't want to feel that way. And I think it'd be easier for them to just release me. But no, no, no. We're going to work with you. So what can I do as a Relief Society president to make it easier to to fill those responsibilities? Do you need a check-in? Do you need me to check in with you midweek? And actually, that is something that I would. Sorry, and that's another thing that I would suggest is that presidents and bishops meet individually with their counselors. It's kind of tough. It's really tough to have that conversation in front of other people, in front of another counselor and secretary, right? It's way easier to have that conversation one-on-one. And so I would suggest that you, in addition to setting up regular bishopric meetings, regular Relief Society meetings, that you also have a cadence of regular one-on-ones, so that you can have those tough conversations, right? And say, what kind of support, what kind of individual support do you need to fulfill these responsibilities? And I think a lot of people feel stuck in that situation because they're trying to address this as a group, and nobody wants to call out somebody else in the middle of a group. So don't. Make sure to have individual one-on-one meetings with people to check in and make sure that, how are you doing? How are things at home? How are you enjoying your calling? How are you, and then we can talk about business as far as like, what can I do to support you better to get those right results?
Yeah.
And I think that one-on-one cadence also really makes it easier for people. If you're meeting with, as a presidency on a Sunday, and you have a one-on-one check-in with somebody on a Thursday, That's a great reminder for the person to be like, oh, shoot, I haven't done anything. All right. So what are you going to do in the next couple of days before we meet again on Sunday to talk about that? Right.
Yeah.
So that one-on-one meeting is really kind of that, just a super accountability mechanism.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that because it seems like there's like phases of accountability, like on a sort of on that primary level. It's like, sure, there's ways to hold people accountable in a group setting, but then there's like, oh, it looks like this person or that person. When you sort of take it to the next level of like, in our next meeting that we're having, we're going to talk about this and address it one on one rather than, scolding them in front of the group or shaming them in front of the group. Right.
Yeah,
So,
exactly like that. Like I was telling you about that one bishop who called that young men's president out on the carpet in
yeah.
front of the whole ward council. That was not good.
Yeah, that's very demotivating. Kind of
Yeah.
get the opposite result of things. So, awesome. Next scenario I want to throw at you is is ministering. The elders quorum president's doing his ministering interviews, and they have this 1, 2, 3 families that they're assigned to on their ministering, and they're not doing it. How do I hold them accountable?
Yeah, the question is how often are you checking in as an elders quorum presidency, and how often are you doing those ministering interviews? It would be the same conversation that the Relief Society president would have with her counselor. Is are you meeting? If you're as a elders quorum presidency only kind of like checking in, every 6 months, yeah, like myself included, I can go a long time and forget to do my ministering, right?
Mhm.
But if I'm meeting with them on a fairly regular basis and having a quick check-in with my elders quorum on a regular basis to make sure they're doing, just check in on those families, that in and of itself is going to motivate. Well, flip, I know Kurt's going to come and talk to me like, every month he's going to be talking to me, asking me about my families, or every other month or whatever it is, right? I'm far more likely to do it. But the conversation would sound a lot like that conversation the Relief Society presidents had, which is, hey, you know what? I've seen that you've missed a number of months in a row. Checking in with your ministering families. Is there anything I can do to support you better?
Mhm.
What can I do to help you? What do you need? Is there anything getting in your way? And let's make it a systems problem. Like, are there any obstacles? Maybe one of the obstacles is I don't have anything in common with them. Right? Well, let's talk about that. That's a legitimate challenge that the elders quorum presidency needs to know. And then they can either say, hey, you could either do this, or we could kind of change it, right? But as a leader, it's your responsibility to be meeting regularly, one-on-one with people or as a companionship. And to ensure that they're fulfilling those responsibilities. And it's your responsibility to support them and say, what can I do to support you? Right?
Yeah, that's really good. Another Kurt asked this question here. I'll spotlight it. Do you approach this differently with young leaders than older, more experienced leaders? I have some thoughts and assumptions, but I'd like to hear you address this. More upfront reminders about assignments, etc.
Yeah, for sure. Like when I've worked with the youth, yeah, and I'm sure this Kurt, his name is Kurt. Yeah, Kurt.
Yeah, yeah,
He, I'm sure he's assuming what I'm going to say is that, yeah, there has to be a little bit more handholding with youth. And for example, this one youth, every time it was his turn to bring the bread for sacrament, he would forget. So step one is I would have some extra bread as a counselor, and the bishopric, I would have some extra bread, just in case, right? And then I'd follow up with him and I'd be like, hey, was there any, how did it go? How did it go with your assignment, the bread assignment? Like I didn't know. And he's like, oh yeah, I forgot again. Hey, is there anything I can do? Oh no, I don't know. Would you like me to text you on Saturday night? Yeah, actually, that would be great. Yeah, sure. And we all need reminders. The difference between kids and adults in their ability to be accountable is we have learned to use tools like calendar reminders and the reminders tool on our phone and things like that. Like, believe me, if I did not have my phone, I would be very, very flaky. I would miss everything.
yeah,
Because I'm used to using these tools. Kids are not, and young leaders are not yet used to using those tools. So yeah, that's what I would do. I mean, that's one example of how I have helped young leaders with their responsibilities. But another thing is, again, I think lessons learned debriefs are a great thing to do with as a quorum, as a young men's presidency, as a quorum, and whether it's a period of time, like to go over the quarter. Hey, what's gone well with our activities over the last quarter? What's gone well with our assignments over the last quarter? What hasn't gone well? What can we do to, as I say, engineer the solution to make it easier for all of us to fulfill our responsibilities? Any thoughts on that, Kurt?
I love it. That's really good. I'm just thinking, like, especially even in the world of like working with YSAs, right, where young single adults, where there may be a different generation. It's like, oh yeah, maybe the 6-year-old bishop gets out his Covey planner. He doesn't make this anymore, right? And he's like, oh, what you do is you got to write it down and carry this planner around. They maybe just have different tools or skill sets as far as remembering things, right? And so it's a conversation of, what works for you to remember that. I put mine in my phone, but what do you do?
Yeah,
Because maybe the skill set isn't developed. There's not necessarily that they're lazy or irresponsible. They just don't know how to do that when we're maybe have 20, 30 years on them with remembering things, right?
exactly. And I think that, and it's not just remembering things. I think a lot of times we will ask, kind of young people to conduct a meeting, and this young person, like we would expect that, somebody in their 20s would know how to do that. A lot of times they don't, right? Give them an agenda. Don't assume these people know how to do things. And so I'd say, and I'm sure we all know this generally, that younger people need a little bit more, or rather less experienced people in the church need a little bit more training, more tools, a little more handholding, and a heck of a lot more patience.
Yeah. Yeah. And this brings me to I think this is getting more airtime than in the past, but this concept of, the youth, allowing the youth to lead. And this isn't just necessarily a question in the youth context, but this concept of let them fail, right? What's your opinion on that approach? That, maybe they do need to kind of fall on their face for the activity one, because that'll make activity two a little bit better.
That's a tough one, because if they're failing, they're also giving a bad experience for all of the other boys, right?
Mhm.
Maybe that could be a learning experience for the other boys. I think it's easy to say, as a youth leader, to say, let them fail. I'm just going to tell them what to do. And if they don't do it, then, they'll fail. And they'll learn from that. Or it'll just totally kill their confidence, right? I would make sure that you're doing everything that you can to help them succeed. And I think there's a great way of training people. And it's a 4-step method of training people. It goes, I do, you watch. Okay. So in a youth context, that means when I am planning the youth activity, I'm going to invite the young man over, or the young man's presidency over, to watch, how do I actually plan this activity, right? Am I making assignments? How am I going to, am I going to make sure that the building is booked? I'm going to make sure that, how am I going to get the materials that we're going to be using, right? How am I going to coordinate that? So they watch me plan it. They watch me execute it. So I do, you watch. Okay. And then you do, I watch. Oh shoot, now I'm forgetting the 4 steps. But it's a gradual.
Is there a we do in there?
That's the one. That's the one. Thank you. Yes. There's the we do, and then it's you do and I watch, and then it's just you do. Shoot, I should have had that memorized off the top of my head. But my point is let's gradually bring them into that. And the step one is really, we need to let them watch how we do it, before we assist them doing it, and then before we let them do it totally on their own.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. Really good stuff. Um, let's see. I'll just show this question as well. Same Kurt, not this Kurt, but different Kurt. Oh, whoops. Let's see. There it goes. Do you adjust any of these recommendations when you're working with young adults? I think we kind of talked about that. They are often on the left side of the learning curve unless they had handbook associated leadership experiences that taught them in the young men's, young women's organization. Demo or teach them one principle at a time. Model these principles in your meeting with them. I don't
Yeah.
know. Anything else? It seems like you covered a lot of that.
I
Anything
think he
else?
was probably typing that as I was sharing my,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
it's been in the queue here a bit.
But yeah, for sure, model. Yeah, you need to give people some time to model, and actually model and debrief. So I'll actually give you a business example. Um, there was actually, I think it was the head. I think I read this. It was the story from the head of HR at Google, and he said one of the best learning experiences of his life was he right out of university he was hired at McKinsey, which is this a consulting firm. It's the premier consulting firm, right? Or regarded as the premier consulting firm. And before they went out to a client site, the senior consulting partner would talk to him and say, "Okay, what do we hope to achieve at this? When we go to the client site, what are we hoping to achieve? What do you think the clients, how are you going to propose that? What do you think the client's objections are going to be? How are you going to respond to those objections, right? And just kind of pepper this young consultant with a lot of questions to prepare them about going into that. And then on the drive home, the senior consultant would be, okay, did we accomplish what we set out to accomplish? Did the objections come up that you thought would come up? Did you handle those objections the way that you wanted to? Was there anything that kind of came out of you out of left field that you want to know how to do better next time? He said it was the most intense learning experience of his life, and I think we can model that as youth leaders or just kind of any leaders when we're going into a situation with somebody, is to ask them, what do you want to learn out of this experience, and what do you need to prepare to do this well, and to let you know that we're going to debrief afterwards and say, okay, how did that go? What can we do better next time? Right? What went well? What can we do better next time? So it's taking that lessons learned debrief on a sort of a smaller individual level.
Yeah. Really helpful. Love it. Let's see. There we go. Awesome. Well, if there's any other questions, now's the time to put them in the question box. But in the meantime, Michael, I mean, obviously people can grab your book off of Amazon, or if people want to learn more about your information, your research, your writing, is there any place you'd send them?
Yeah, I think the first place to look is the TED Talk. It's 11 minutes, and it's really it's an 11-minute summary of the book.
Yeah.
I had been, and so all you need to do is just Google Michael Timms, Timms, TED, and it'll be the first thing that'll pop up.
Cool. And I'll actually post it in the general discussion in Zion Lab, so that I think it'll start a great discussion outside of this interview as well. So.
Cool. Yeah. So that'd probably be the first place to look. Like I said, it's 11 minutes, and if you find that's interesting, I think the next place would be YouTube channel. You can just go michaeltimms.com, and you can find a lot of articles that I've published, and then as well the book, How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability.
Awesome. Really good. Well, last question I have for you, Michael, is as you reflect on your research in leadership, or just in your personal leadership journey, how has being a leader helped you become a better disciple or follower of Jesus Christ?
Yeah, it's interesting that the principles of leadership, becoming a better leader, really helps you become a better human being. Um, it has for sure, like I know a lot of times people say, oh, well, a key leadership attribute is humility. Okay, well, what are the exact behaviors? Like what, sure, like everybody thinks they're humble, right? But
I know I am, but
yeah, exactly. I could teach a class on humility, let me tell you. Um, so, no, but so I think learning to be a better leader, take the attribute of humility. What are the behaviors? Let's drill down there of humility. And I think one of the key aspects of humility is looking in the mirror and saying, how am I causing, or how have I contributed to my own problems? That has helped me be a better human being. It's helped me be and get better results, not just at work, but in life, because there's so many people who walk around thinking that, all of the bad things that happen to them are because of other people or bad circumstances. And if you have that mindset, you're going to have, you're going to be, if you are taking on that kind of victim mentality mindset, and you're never going to figure out how to make your future better than your past. But also getting back to that theme of humility, sincerely asking for feedback. Hey, how can I do better at leading meetings? How can I do better at this? That's a behavior that demonstrates, asking somebody for advice, that is demonstrating humility, right? And it's made me, like I said, a better leader. It's made me a better human being. And we know that that's a key attribute of being a disciple of Jesus Christ, is to be meek and humble.